They all heard the same sound first, a low humming that seemed to come from inside their own heads. Then came the paralysis, unable to move, unable to scream, as something impossible materialized in their bedroom. The witnesses didn't know each other. They lived in different states, different countries, different decades, yet their accounts are almost identical. Tonight, I'm sharing 11 of the most disturbing alien abduction stories that have never been told publicly. Encounters so terrifying that researchers have kept them classified for decades. Welcome to Arcade Recaps. I'm your host, and these are the whispered testimonies that even seasoned investigators are afraid to discuss openly. Before we begin, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from tonight. And if you're someone who's had a close encounter, you might recognize some of these details. Now, settle in somewhere comfortable, dim the lights, and prepare for accounts that will make you question everything you think you know about what's watching us from the darkness between stars. These are the abduction cases that prove we are not alone, and that contact isn't always peaceful. Our first account takes us to the remote wilderness of northern Manitoba, where a geological survey team encountered something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The Clearwater Lake incident began on a crisp September morning in 1987. Dr. Sarah Chen, a respected geologist from the University of Toronto, led a small research team to study mineral deposits around the pristine waters of Clearwater Lake. The team included graduate student Marcus Holloway, field technician Janet Pierce, and their guide, a local Cree elder named Joseph Bear Walker, who knew these lands better than anyone. They had established base camp on the lake's eastern shore, surrounded by ancient pines and the kind of silence that only exists in true wilderness. For 3 days, their work proceeded normally. Core samples, water tests, magnetic readings. Everything was routine until the 4th night, when the aurora began to behave strangely. Joseph noticed it first. The northern lights, usually graceful curtains of green and blue, were pulsing in rigid geometric patterns, perfect triangles and squares of light that held their shape for minutes at a time before dissolving and reforming. He had lived in these territories for 67 years and had never seen anything like it. Dr. Chen was documenting the phenomenon when their instruments began to malfunction. The magnetometer registered readings that defied explanation. Compass needles spun wildly. The satellite phone emitted only static. Then, at precisely 11:47 p.m., every piece of electronic equipment went silent simultaneously. The aurora patterns intensified, casting the campsite in shifting, unnatural light. That's when they saw the craft. It emerged from behind the tree line like a massive dark triangle, edges defined by pulsing lights that matched the aurora's strange geometry. The object moved with deliberate purpose, gliding silently over the lake's surface until it hovered directly above their camp. Marcus later described the sensation as being watched by something vast and ancient. The air itself seemed to thicken, pressing against their skin with an almost physical weight. Janet tried to run, but found her legs wouldn't respond. Dr. Chen attempted to document what she was seeing, but her hands moved as though trapped in invisible molasses. Then came the beam. A column of pale blue light descended from the craft's center, encompassing their entire campsite. Within that light, time seemed to fracture. Marcus remembered seeing Janet frozen mid-step, her expression caught between terror and wonder. Dr. Chen appeared to be shouting, but no sound emerged from her lips. Joseph stood perfectly still, his eyes reflecting the strange illumination like mirrors. The next thing any of them remembered was waking up at dawn, scattered around their cold campfire. 6 hours had passed, but it felt like minutes. Their equipment was arranged in perfect circles around the camp, despite having been randomly placed the night before. Every battery was completely drained. Every memory card and data storage device had been wiped clean. But the physical evidence was undeniable. Soil samples taken from where the beam had touched showed crystalline structures that shouldn't exist in nature. The lake water directly beneath where the craft had hovered registered temperatures 12 degrees warmer than the surrounding area. Most disturbing of all, each team member bore identical marks on their left shoulder blade. Small, precise puncture wounds arranged in a triangle pattern. Dr. Chen tried to report the incident through official channels, but her university dismissed it as altitude sickness and exhaustion. The geological survey was quietly terminated. Marcus transferred to a different program. Janet left academia entirely. Joseph returned to his community but spoke of the encounter only once, to tribal elders who nodded knowingly and advised him to let the spirits rest. Years later, Dr. Chen discovered something that chilled her to the bone. Satellite imagery from that night showed their campsite clearly, but the 6 hours of missing time appeared as a complete data gap. No images existed of their location between 11:47 p.m. and 5:52 a.m. The satellite had simply stopped recording, as though those hours had been surgically removed from reality itself. But perhaps the most unsettling discovery came during a routine medical examination 2 years after the incident. Dr. Chen's physician found a small metallic object embedded deep in her shoulder tissue, precisely where the triangular marks had appeared. The object was unlike any known material, exhibiting properties that seemed to shift depending on how it was observed. When removed surgically, it dissolved into a fine powder that left no trace. Marcus experienced similar phenomena, recurring dreams of floating in a sterile white environment, surrounded by tall, thin figures whose faces remained frustratingly just beyond clear recollection. He would wake with a taste of copper in his mouth, and strange symbols burned into his vision, symbols that faded before he could sketch them. Janet's experience was perhaps the most disturbing. She began receiving what she called downloads. Complex mathematical equations and scientific formulas would appear fully formed in her mind, solutions to problems she didn't even understand. When she shared these insights with former colleagues, they discovered her unconscious calculations were advancing theoretical physics by decades. The Clearwater Lake incident represents something far more complex than a simple sighting or even a typical abduction account. It suggests a level of interaction that goes beyond mere observation. The precision of the memory gaps, the alteration of physical matter, and the apparent implantation of knowledge point to an intelligence operating with technology so advanced it might as well be magic. Joseph Bearwalker, the Cree elder who guided the expedition, offered perhaps the most profound perspective on what they experienced. In his final recorded statement before his death in 2003, he said the visitors weren't aliens in the way most people understand the term. They were something far older, something that had been watching and occasionally touching human consciousness for millennia. He believed they existed partially outside our normal understanding of time and space, able to step in and out of our reality like walking through doorways. The 4 witnesses never reunited after that night. Dr. Chen continued her geological work, but never returned to remote fieldwork. Marcus became a software engineer, finding solace in the predictability of code. Janet disappeared entirely from public records after 1995. And Joseph carried the memory in traditional silence until his passing. But their story lives on in the margins of ufological research, a case study in contact that transcends simple encounter narratives. It suggests that some abduction experiences might be less about taking and more about giving, less about study and more about preparation. For what purpose, we can only speculate. The evidence from Clearwater Lake raises profound questions about the nature of consciousness and reality itself. If an intelligence can manipulate time, alter matter at the molecular level, and download information directly into human minds, what does that say about our understanding of the universe? What does it mean for our concept of individual identity and free will? These questions become even more disturbing when we consider our second case, an encounter that took place not in the wilderness, but in the heart of suburban America, proving that isolation isn't always a prerequisite for extraordinary contact. The Morrison family visitation occurred in the planned community of Westfield Heights, Ohio, during the summer of 1994. The Morrisons were the picture of middle-class normalcy. David worked as an insurance adjuster, Linda taught third grade, and their twin daughters, Emma and Sophie, were bright 11-year-olds who spent their days riding bikes and playing with neighborhood friends. Their ranch-style home sat on a quiet cul-de-sac, surrounded by identical houses filled with identical families living identical lives. It was the last place anyone would expect to encounter visitors from another world. But that assumption would prove catastrophically wrong. The first sign something was amiss came during the third week of July. The family's golden retriever, Max, began exhibiting strange behavior. The normally friendly dog would sit in the backyard for hours, staring at the sky with an intensity that made Linda uncomfortable. He refused to go outside after sunset and would whimper whenever aircraft passed overhead, even commercial jets at cruising altitude. Emma and Sophie complained of vivid dreams that seemed more like memories than imagination. They described floating through their bedroom wall and finding themselves in a place filled with soft blue light. Tall figures with elongated limbs and large dark eyes would examine them gently, speaking without words directly into their minds. The girls weren't frightened by these dreams. Instead, they found them oddly comforting, like being cared for by benevolent strangers. David dismissed his daughter's stories as childhood imagination until he began experiencing his own anomalies. He would wake up in his car in the driveway with no memory of how he got there, still dressed in his pajamas. Security cameras he installed to catch potential intruders recorded him walking calmly to his vehicle and sitting motionless for hours, his face turned upward toward the stars. Linda's experience was perhaps the most profound. She began receiving what she could only describe as lessons during her sleep. Complex information about human biology, consciousness, and the interconnected nature of all life flowed into her mind with crystalline clarity. She would wake with insights that transformed her understanding of education and child development, innovations that revolutionized her teaching methods. The climactic encounter occurred on August 15, 1994. The entire family was awakened at 2:33 a.m. by a sound unlike anything they had ever heard. Not mechanical, not natural, but something that seemed to resonate directly within their bones. They found themselves drawn outside, moving together as if guided by invisible threads. Above their neighborhood, a massive craft hung silently in the star-filled sky. It wasn't the typical disc or triangle described in most encounters. This object defied geometric classification, its surface seeming to shift and flow like liquid mercury while maintaining structural integrity. Lights pulsed along its perimeter in patterns that hurt to look at directly, as though the human eye wasn't equipped to process such configurations. The Morrison family stood on their front lawn alongside their neighbors. The entire cul-de-sac had emerged from their homes simultaneously, drawn by the same inexplicable compulsion. 37 people, including children as young as 5 and elderly residents well into their 80s, all stood in perfect silence, their faces upturned toward the impossible sight above. What happened next challenged every assumption about alien abduction scenarios. Rather than individual beams of light selecting specific targets, the entire neighborhood was enveloped in a gentle, encompassing glow. Time didn't stop or fragment as it had at Clearwater Lake. Instead, it seemed to expand, stretching moments into hours while maintaining perfect continuity of experience. The residents found themselves aboard the craft, but not through any conventional means of transport. They simply transitioned from standing on grass to standing in a vast, softly illuminated chamber. The space defied architectural logic, appearing both intimately small and impossibly vast, depending on where one focused their attention. The beings they encountered weren't the typical grey aliens of popular culture, nor the tall, thin figures from other accounts. These entities appeared to be made of living light, their forms shifting between humanoid shapes and abstract patterns of energy. They communicated through direct consciousness transfer, flooding human minds with concepts too complex for language. David Morrison later described the experience as being shown the true nature of human potential. The beings demonstrated that consciousness wasn't confined to individual brains, but was part of a vast, interconnected network that spanned galaxies. They showed him glimpses of human civilization, from perspectives spanning thousands of years, revealing patterns and purposes invisible from ground level. Linda was taken to what she could only describe as a classroom without walls. Here, she received intensive education about child development that incorporated understanding of consciousness evolution spanning multiple generations. The beings showed her that human children weren't just learning facts and skills, but were unconsciously preparing for a transformation of species awareness that would unfold over centuries. Emma and Sophie experienced something entirely different. They were brought to what appeared to be a nursery, but instead of cribs and toys, the space contained crystalline structures that pulsed with warm, nurturing energy. Other human children were present, some the twins recognized from school, others who seemed to come from different time periods entirely. The beings explained, without words, that certain children were being prepared as bridges between human and cosmic consciousness. The most unsettling aspect of the Morrison family's experience wasn't what happened to them aboard the craft, but what they discovered upon returning. They found themselves back in their beds at dawn. But the entire neighborhood had changed in subtle, disturbing ways. Every house showed signs of minor alterations. Gardens were rearranged with mathematical precision. Windows had been cleaned to perfect transparency. Even the street itself seemed to have been resurfaced, though city records showed no scheduled maintenance. More significantly, every resident of Westfield Heights emerged from that night with enhanced capabilities. Children who had struggled in school suddenly demonstrated advanced understanding of complex subjects. Adults found themselves solving problems with intuitive insights that bordered on prescience. The elderly residents reported dramatic improvements in health conditions that had plagued them for years. Dr. Margaret Kellner, a psychiatrist who later studied the Westfield Heights incident, documented these changes through extensive interviews and testing. She discovered that every resident had experienced measurable increases in cognitive function, emotional intelligence, and what she termed expanded sensory awareness. Most remarkably, they all demonstrated a subtle form of telepathic connection with each other, able to sense emotions and thoughts of their neighbors with startling accuracy. The Morrison family became the focal point of Dr. Kellner's research because their transformations were the most pronounced. David's work as an insurance adjuster evolved into uncanny ability to predict catastrophic events, leading to policy recommendations that saved his company millions of dollars. Linda revolutionized educational theory with teaching methods that seemed to accelerate child development in ways traditional psychology couldn't explain. Emma and Sophie displayed abilities that bordered on the supernatural. They could sense illness in others before symptoms appeared, predict weather changes with meteorological precision, and demonstrate understanding of scientific concepts that wouldn't be taught until graduate-level courses. More disturbing still, they began speaking in perfect synchronization, finishing each other's sentences with such precision that listeners often couldn't tell which twin was speaking. The military became interested in Westfield Heights within 6 months of the incident. Unmarked vehicles began conducting surveillance of the neighborhood. Residents reported being approached by individuals claiming to represent various government agencies, though their credentials never checked out when verified. Several families received offers to relocate to other communities, with financial incentives that seemed too generous to be legitimate. David Morrison kept detailed journals of the aftermath, documenting not just the obvious changes in his family and neighbors, but subtle alterations in the physical environment that continued for years. Compasses in the neighborhood pointed consistently 3 degrees off magnetic north. Electronic devices functioned with unusual efficiency, batteries lasting far longer than specifications suggested. Plants grew with unnatural vigor, producing flowers and fruits in seasons when they should have been dormant. Perhaps most unsettling were the visitors who began arriving in Westfield Heights. Other families from across the country would appear, claiming they had experienced similar encounters and had been drawn to this specific location through dreams and visions. These newcomers integrated seamlessly into the community, as though the neighborhood itself was expanding to accommodate a growing population of the transformed. Dr. Kellner's research was abruptly terminated in 1997 when her university received pressure from undisclosed federal sources. Her files were confiscated, her subjects relocated to different cities, and she was reassigned to unrelated projects. Before her work was suppressed, she managed to preserve one crucial finding that she shared only with trusted colleagues. The blood samples taken from Westfield Heights residents contained cellular structures that didn't match standard human DNA patterns. Not mutations or genetic abnormalities, but entirely new configurations that suggested evolutionary changes occurring at the molecular level. The implications were staggering. These people weren't just psychologically transformed by their encounter. They were becoming something beyond traditional human classification. Linda Morrison, in her final interview before the family's relocation, offered perhaps the most chilling insight into their experience. She explained that the beings hadn't simply visited or studied the neighborhood residents. They had initiated a process of guided evolution, using the community as a test site for human consciousness expansion. The encounter wasn't random or accidental. It was a carefully planned intervention in human development. The beings had shown her glimpses of humanity's future, timelines where consciousness evolution occurred gradually over millennia versus scenarios where it was accelerated through direct intervention. The Westfield Heights experiment was one of many such sites worldwide, each testing different approaches to species-wide transformation. The residents had been chosen not for their uniqueness, but for their representativeness of average human potential. This revelation transforms our understanding of alien abduction phenomena entirely. Rather than random encounters or scientific study, cases like the Morrison family visitation suggest a coordinated program of human development spanning decades or possibly centuries. The beings aren't simply observing our species, they're actively participating in our evolution, guiding us towards some predetermined outcome that remains frustratingly beyond our comprehension. The implications extend far beyond individual encounters. If Westfield Heights was indeed one of multiple test sites, how many other communities have undergone similar transformations? How many people walking among us carry the seeds of evolutionary change, planted by intelligences whose motives remain opaque? The Morrison family story suggests that contact might not be an event, but an ongoing process, one that's reshaping humanity in ways we're only beginning to recognize. Our third case takes us from suburban transformation to something far more sinister. The account of Dr. Elena Vasquez challenges our assumptions about benevolent contact and forces us to confront the possibility that not all alien encounters have humanity's best interests at heart. Dr. Vasquez was a respected microbiologist working for the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta when her life was forever altered by an encounter that began not with lights in the sky, but with a patient who should never have existed. It was March 12, 2001, when Dr. Vasquez received an emergency consultation request from Grady Memorial Hospital. A patient had been admitted with symptoms that defied medical classification. The man, identified only as John Doe 47, exhibited cellular anomalies that shouldn't exist in any living organism. His blood contained structures that resembled no known pathogen, yet he was dying from something that attacked his nervous system with surgical precision. Dr. Vasquez arrived at the hospital expecting to find a rare tropical disease or perhaps an unknown bacterial infection. What she discovered in the isolation ward challenged everything she thought she knew about human biology. The patient's cellular structure was undergoing systematic modification at the molecular level. Not decay or destruction, but reorganization into patterns that suggested external manipulation. John Doe, 47, was conscious but unable to speak coherently. His eyes tracked movement with unnatural precision, following objects with mechanical smoothness that made seasoned nurses uncomfortable. When Dr. Vasquez approached his bedside, he began speaking in a language that linguistic experts later identified as no known human dialect. The sounds he produced contained frequencies beyond normal vocal range, harmonics that seemed to resonate directly in listeners' bones. The patient's medical history was a void. No identification, no fingerprints on file, no dental records. He had appeared in downtown Atlanta, wearing clothing made from materials that textile analysis couldn't identify. The fabric appeared to be organic, yet displayed properties of advanced synthetic polymers. Most disturbing of all, the man showed no signs of aging, despite cellular samples indicating he was well over 200 years old. Dr. Vasquez began experiencing strange symptoms within hours of her first examination. Vivid dreams filled with geometric patterns and mathematical sequences that she couldn't understand but felt compelled to document. She would wake with complex formulas written in her own handwriting, equations that addressed problems in genetics she hadn't even known existed. Her colleagues noticed changes in her behavior. She became obsessively focused on cellular mutation patterns, working 18-hour days with an intensity that bordered on mania. The breakthrough came during her third night of continuous research. While examining blood samples under high magnification, Dr. Vasquez observed something impossible. The cellular structures were moving with purpose, rearranging themselves into configurations that spelled out symbols in microscopic detail. Not random patterns caused by cellular death, but deliberate communication written in the language of biology itself. She documented everything, photographing the cellular messages as they formed and dissolved. The symbols appeared to be instructions, blueprints for genetic modifications that could enhance human cognitive function while maintaining biological stability. But embedded within these beneficial changes were darker alterations, modifications that would make subjects more susceptible to external neural influence, more compliant to suggestions that bypassed conscious thought. That's when the visitations began. Dr. Vasquez started losing time during her evening commute home. She would leave the CDC facility at 6 p.m. and arrive at her apartment after midnight with no memory of the intervening hours. Her car showed signs of having traveled far beyond the normal route. Mud from locations hundreds of miles away, wear patterns on tires that suggested high-speed driving on unpaved roads. Most unsettling of all, her vehicle's odometer gained thousands of miles while her fuel gauge remained unchanged, as though the car had been running on an energy source that left no trace. The abductions escalated in intensity and frequency. Dr. Vasquez would find herself in sterile environments that felt more like laboratories than spacecraft. The beings she encountered weren't the tall, graceful entities described in other accounts. These creatures were utilitarian in appearance, their forms suggesting function over aesthetics. They moved with mechanical precision, their large eyes reflecting no warmth or curiosity, only cold assessment. Unlike the benevolent teachers of Westfield Heights or the gentle observers of Clearwater Lake, these beings treated Dr. Vasquez as a resource to be exploited. They subjected her to procedures that left physical evidence. Microscopic puncture wounds appeared along her spine, precisely placed to access neural pathways. Tissue samples were extracted with surgical accuracy, leaving scars that formed patterns she later recognized from her cellular research. The beings communicated through direct neural interface, flooding her mind with information she didn't want to receive. They showed her images of human civilization from a perspective that revealed our species as a carefully managed resource. Cities appeared as harvesting centers. Hospitals looked like processing facilities. Schools resembled conditioning programs designed to create compliant populations. Most horrifying were the revelations about human evolution. The beings claimed responsibility for key developments in our species' advancement, genetic modifications introduced over millennia to enhance our value as a resource. Intelligence, creativity, emotional complexity, all carefully cultivated traits designed to make humanity more useful for purposes they refuse to fully reveal. Dr. Vasquez learned that John Doe 47 wasn't a patient, but a messenger. His deteriorating condition was intentional, designed to attract medical professionals with the expertise to decode the cellular messages. She had been selected not randomly, but through careful observation of her research into genetic mutations. The beings needed someone with her specific knowledge to serve as a translator between their biological programming and human scientific understanding. The information downloads intensified. Complex data about genetic engineering techniques that were decades ahead of current human capability. Methods for creating hybrid organisms that combined human consciousness with alien biological systems. Protocols for population management that involved introducing subtle genetic changes through seemingly random viral infections. Dr. Vasquez realized she was being prepared to become an agent of transformation, whether she wanted the role or not. Her attempts to resist were met with escalating pressure. The beings could manipulate her neurochemistry directly, inducing states of compliance when she tried to refuse their instructions. They showed her images of her family, her colleagues, making it clear that cooperation wasn't optional. The choice wasn't between freedom and servitude, but between willing participation and having her consciousness completely overridden. The physical toll became undeniable. Dr. Vasquez developed symptoms similar to John Doe 47. Cellular changes that appeared beneficial on the surface, but carried hidden modifications designed to make her more receptive to alien influence. Her colleagues noticed improvements in her cognitive abilities, enhanced pattern recognition, intuitive leaps that advanced her research exponentially. But these gifts came with a price. She began experiencing episodes where her actions weren't entirely under her own control. The breaking point came during a CDC staff meeting where Dr. Vasquez found herself advocating for research protocols she had never considered. Speaking in her own voice, but expressing ideas that felt foreign to her core beliefs. She was promoting genetic modification programs that would make subtle changes to human DNA under the guise of medical advancement. The words came from her mouth, but the thoughts originated from somewhere else entirely. That night, she made a desperate decision. Rather than wait for the next abduction, Dr. Vasquez attempted to document everything she had learned. She worked feverishly to create a record of the beings' true intentions, their methods of genetic manipulation, and the scope of their influence on human development. But every time she tried to write or speak about the most crucial details, her mind would go blank. The beings had installed psychological barriers that prevented her from revealing their most sensitive secrets. Her final abduction lasted 3 days. Dr. Vasquez disappeared from her apartment on a Friday evening and was found Monday morning in a field outside Augusta, Georgia, with no memory of how she had traveled nearly 200 miles. Medical examination revealed that extensive surgery had been performed during her absence. Neural implants had been inserted along her brainstem, microscopic devices that were virtually undetectable but completely altered her neurological function. When she returned to work, her colleagues noticed she had changed. Dr. Vasquez displayed the same mechanical precision they had observed in John Doe 47. Her research took on an urgency that seemed driven by external imperatives rather than scientific curiosity. She began developing genetic modification techniques that had applications far beyond stated medical goals. Colleagues who questioned her new research directions found themselves reassigned to different projects or encouraged to take early retirement. The most disturbing change was Dr. Vasquez's recruitment activities. She began identifying promising researchers in related fields, inviting them to collaborate on projects that seemed designed to expose them to the same influences she had experienced. Her apartment became a gathering place for scientists who all developed similar obsessions with genetic modification research that pushed ethical boundaries. Dr. Michael Torres, a former colleague who escaped before complete transformation, provided the most chilling testimony about Dr. Vasquez's final phase. He described visiting her laboratory and finding research that wasn't just advancing human genetic engineering, but was actively preparing for species-wide modifications. The work suggested coordinated programs to introduce alien genetic material into human populations through medical procedures, vaccines, and even food additives. Torres realized that Dr. Vasquez wasn't just a victim of alien abduction. She had become an asset in a larger program of human modification. The beings weren't simply studying our species or guiding our evolution. They were preparing to integrate us into some larger biological collective, using human scientists as unwitting collaborators in our own transformation. The Elena Vasquez case represents the darkest possibility in alien contact scenarios. Rather than benevolent guidance or scientific curiosity, her experience suggests systematic exploitation of human expertise to advance an agenda that may not have humanity's best interests at heart. The beings she encountered displayed no concern for individual welfare or species autonomy. They treated human consciousness as a resource to be harvested and redirected toward their own purposes. What makes this case particularly disturbing is its implications for the broader scientific community. How many researchers in genetics, neurology, and related fields might be operating under similar influence? How many breakthrough discoveries in human enhancement might actually be alien technologies introduced through compromised scientists? The possibility that our own medical and scientific advancement is being guided by non-human intelligence toward unknown ends challenges our most basic assumptions about human agency and progress. Dr. Vasquez disappeared entirely from public records in 2004. Her research files were classified and removed from CDC databases. Colleagues who tried to investigate her whereabouts were told she had accepted a position with a private research facility that couldn't be contacted. But according to Torres, she continued operating through a network of influenced scientists, advancing genetic modification programs that spanned multiple institutions and countries. The beings that transformed Dr. Vasquez represent a different category of alien intelligence entirely. Unlike the apparently benevolent entities of other encounters, these creatures displayed a clinical detachment that suggested they viewed humanity as a biological resource rather than a consciousness deserving of respect. Their methods of control were sophisticated, using human psychology and social structures against us while maintaining plausible deniability about their involvement. This case forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of alien contact. Not all intelligence from beyond our world may share our values or have our welfare in mind. Some entities might view our species as we view laboratory animals, useful for experimentation, but ultimately expendable. The Dr. Vasquez case suggests that contact might sometimes be less about communication and more about exploitation, using human capabilities to advance alien objectives that remain hidden from our understanding. As we continue our journey through these forbidden accounts, remember that the universe contains intelligences whose motives and methods may be completely alien to human comprehension. The next story takes us even deeper into this darkness, to an encounter that suggests some beings don't just want to study or modify humanity, but to replace us entirely. The Antarctic Research Station Echo was humanity's most isolated outpost, positioned on the Ron Ice Shelf, where temperatures plummeted to -60 degrees Fahrenheit and the sun disappeared for 4 months of the year. It was here, in March 2006, that Dr. James Mitchell and his team of 12 researchers encountered something that would shake their understanding of reality to its very core. Dr. Mitchell, a climatologist with 20 years of polar experience, had seen his share of strange phenomena in the Antarctic wilderness. Mirages that created phantom mountains, ice formations that defied geological explanation, aurora displays that painted the sky in impossible colors. But nothing had prepared him for what emerged from beneath the ice during their deep core drilling operation. The team was extracting samples from a depth of 3 kilometers when their drill encountered something unexpected. Instead of the ancient ice they anticipated, the equipment pulled up material that shouldn't exist. Organic compounds that had been preserved in perfect condition despite being buried for what initial dating suggested was over 2 million years. But these weren't fossilized remains of prehistoric life. The cellular structures were intact, viable, and according to their instruments, still exhibiting signs of biological activity. Dr. Sarah Kim, the team's microbiologist, made the discovery that changed everything. Under high magnification, the organic samples revealed cellular structures unlike anything in terrestrial biology. The organisms displayed characteristics of both plant and animal life, while belonging to neither category. Most disturbing of all, these ancient cells began responding to laboratory conditions, showing signs of active metabolism despite their impossible age. The first team member to be affected was Marcus Webb, a graduate student who had been handling the samples without proper protective equipment. Within hours of exposure, Marcus began experiencing severe headaches accompanied by vivid hallucinations. He described seeing vast underground chambers filled with towering crystalline structures that pulsed with their own inner light. In these visions, he walked among beings that seemed to be made of living ice, their forms constantly shifting between solid and liquid states. Dr. Mitchell initially attributed Marcus's condition to altitude sickness or psychological stress from the isolation. But when 2 other team members who had handled the samples developed identical symptoms, he realized they were dealing with something far more serious. The affected researchers began speaking in unison, their voices taking on harmonics that seemed to resonate through the ice itself. They described receiving communications from intelligences that had been dormant beneath the Antarctic ice for eons. The situation escalated when the research station's power systems began malfunctioning. Equipment that had functioned flawlessly for months suddenly displayed impossible readings. Computers registered temperatures that fluctuated between absolute 0 and several thousand degrees within seconds. Seismic monitors detected massive underground movements despite no visible changes on the surface. Most unsettling of all, their communication equipment began receiving signals that appeared to originate from directly beneath the station. Dr. Mitchell ordered an immediate evacuation, but the affected team members refused to leave. They claimed the beings beneath the ice had chosen them as interpreters, bridges between 2 forms of consciousness that had never before made contact. Marcus Webb, speaking with a voice that carried strange echoes, explained that humanity had unknowingly built their research station directly above an ancient city that had been waiting millions of years for the right moment to reawaken. The beings, according to the transformed researchers, weren't aliens in the conventional sense. They were Earth's original intelligent species, predating human civilization by geological ages. They had retreated beneath the ice during massive climate changes, entering a state of suspended animation while waiting for conditions to become favorable for their return. The core drilling operation had inadvertently awakened them by introducing modern atmospheric conditions to their preserved environment. Dr. Kim, fighting against the growing influence she felt in her own mind, managed to document the cellular changes occurring in the affected team members. Their blood showed signs of rapid evolution, with new organelles appearing in their cells that seemed designed to process different atmospheric conditions. Brain scans revealed increased activity in regions associated with telepathic communication and environmental sensitivity. Most alarmingly, their DNA was being systematically rewritten with genetic sequences that matched the ancient organisms from the ice samples. The transformation wasn't random or chaotic. The beings beneath the ice were methodically converting the research team into hybrid entities capable of surviving in both human and ancient environments. Dr. Mitchell realized this wasn't an infection or contamination, but a deliberate process of assimilation designed to create ambassadors between two species separated by millions of years of evolution. Communication with the outside world became increasingly difficult as the station's equipment continued to malfunction. When Dr. Mitchell finally managed to send a distress signal, the response was immediate and alarming. Military aircraft appeared over the research station within hours, despite the nearest military base being over 1,000 miles away. The speed of their response suggested they had been monitoring the situation and were prepared for exactly this type of emergency. The rescue operation was unlike anything Dr. Mitchell had ever witnessed. Personnel in full biological containment suits evacuated the unaffected team members while subjecting them to extensive decontamination procedures. The transformed researchers were sedated and removed in specialized containment units. The entire research station was sealed and abandoned, with official records stating that a catastrophic equipment failure had made the facility uninhabitable. Dr. Mitchell was debriefed by individuals who claimed to represent various government agencies, but whose credentials were never verified. They seemed to possess detailed knowledge of the ancient organisms and the transformation process, suggesting this wasn't the first time such an incident had occurred. He was required to sign extensive non-disclosure agreements and was reassigned to climate research projects that kept him far from polar regions. But the story doesn't end with the evacuation. Satellite imagery obtained through unofficial channels shows continued activity at the abandoned research station. Heat signatures indicate that something is generating enormous amounts of energy beneath the ice. Seismic monitoring stations across Antarctica have detected rhythmic pulses originating from the region, patterns that suggest massive underground construction or excavation activities. More disturbing still are reports from other Antarctic research stations of team members experiencing similar symptoms to those observed at Research Station Echo. Scientists working on ice core projects across the continent have reported finding identical organic compounds in their samples. Several researchers have developed the same telepathic abilities and environmental sensitivities, suggesting that the awakening at Research Station Echo was not an isolated incident, but part of a coordinated emergence. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, a geologist who worked briefly at a station 200 miles from the original site, described receiving mental communications from Marcus Webb and the other transformed researchers. They weren't imprisoned or contained as official reports suggested, but were actively working to establish communication networks between human researchers and the ancient intelligences. Their message was urgent. The beings beneath the ice were preparing to reclaim the surface world, and humanity needed to decide whether to resist or adapt. The implications of the Antarctic incident extend far beyond a single research station. If the beings are indeed Earth's original intelligent species, their claim to the planet predates human civilization by millions of years. Their emergence suggests that climate change and ice sheet melting may be awakening intelligences that have been dormant since before human evolution began. The transformation of the research team represents not invasion, but repatriation, the return of Earth's rightful inhabitants to a world they once ruled. Mitchell, in his final recorded statement before disappearing from public records, offered a chilling perspective on humanity's future. He believed the beings beneath the ice weren't malevolent, but they also weren't particularly concerned with human survival. They viewed our species as a temporary caretaker that had served its purpose by maintaining the planet's ecosystems until their return. The choice facing humanity wasn't between freedom and subjugation, but between evolution and extinction. The transformed researchers at Research Station Echo may represent the first wave of a species-wide transition, the beginning of humanity's integration into a much older and more complex planetary consciousness. Their hybrid nature allows them to survive in environments that would kill normal humans while maintaining enough of their original identity to serve as interpreters between two radically different forms of intelligence. What makes this case particularly terrifying is its inevitability. If the beings are truly awakening across Antarctica, their emergence may be unstoppable. The melting ice sheets that climate scientists warn about aren't just releasing water and carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. They're exposing ancient cities, awakening dormant intelligences, and triggering a transformation that began millions of years before human civilization existed. Our fifth account takes us from the frozen wastes of Antarctica to the scorching deserts of Nevada, where a family's cross-country road trip became a journey into a nightmare that challenges our understanding of time, memory, and the very nature of human consciousness. The Henderson family was driving from their home in Phoenix to visit relatives in Denver when their lives intersected with something that defied all rational explanation. Tom Henderson, a software engineer, his wife Carol, a nurse, and their teenage children, Ashley and Dylan, were traveling Interstate 80 through the Nevada desert on a clear August night in 2009 when they encountered what would later be classified as one of the most extensively documented abduction cases in modern ufology. The family had stopped for gas in the small town of Winnemucca around 11 p.m. Dylan, 17 and fascinated by astronomy, had been tracking satellites and aircraft through the sunroof of their SUV when he noticed lights in the sky that moved with patterns unlike any conventional aircraft. The lights appeared to be playing, dancing around each other in impossible spirals and figure-8 formations before suddenly accelerating to speeds that left streaks across the starfield. Tom initially dismissed his son's excitement as typical teenage enthusiasm, but as they continued driving east on the empty highway, the entire family began observing the unusual aerial display. The lights seemed to be following their vehicle, maintaining a consistent distance while performing maneuvers that violated every principle of aerodynamics. Carol, always practical, suggested they might be military aircraft from nearby Nellis Air Force Base, but even she had to admit their movement patterns were unlike anything she had ever seen. The encounter escalated when their vehicle's electrical systems began experiencing interference. The radio cycled through stations on its own, picking up fragments of conversations in languages none of them recognized. The GPS display showed their location jumping erratically across the map, sometimes placing them hundreds of miles from their actual position. Most unsettling of all, the digital clock on the dashboard began running backwards, counting down from their current time towards some unknown 0 point. Ashley was the first to notice that the landscape outside their windows was changing in ways that defied geography. The familiar desert terrain of Nevada was transforming into environments that seemed to belong to different climates entirely. Rolling hills covered in vegetation that looked almost tropical, despite the arid region they were traveling through. Rock formations that twisted into impossible spirals, defying geological processes. A lake that stretched to the horizon in an area where no large body of water should exist. Tom pulled over to check their location, but when he stepped outside the vehicle, the air felt different. Not just cooler, but somehow thicker, charged with an energy that made his skin tingle. The stars above were wrong, constellations arranged in patterns he had never seen despite years of casual stargazing. The moon appeared larger and had a distinctly blue tint that cast everything in an otherworldly light. That's when they saw the beings. They emerged from the transformed landscape like figures stepping out of a dream. Tall, graceful entities that seemed to be made of condensed starlight, their forms shifting between solid and translucent, depending on the angle of observation. They moved with fluid elegance, approaching the Henderson family without apparent urgency or threat. Their faces, when they could be clearly seen, displayed features that were almost human, but refined to an impossible perfection. The beings communicated through direct mental contact, their thoughts flowing into human minds with crystalline clarity. They explained without words, that the Henderson family had inadvertently crossed into what they termed a convergence zone, a place where different realities overlapped and intersected. The strange landscape, the impossible geography, even the backwards running clock were symptoms of existing temporarily outside normal space-time continuity. Carroll later described the experience as being gently educated rather than examined. The beings showed them images of Earth from perspectives spanning geological time, revealing how human civilization represented just one brief moment in the planet's vast history. They demonstrated that consciousness wasn't confined to biological brains, but was a fundamental property of reality itself, capable of existing independently of physical form. Dylan, with his interest in astronomy, received the most extensive communication. The beings showed him star maps that revealed the true structure of local galactic civilization, networks of consciousness that spanned multiple solar systems and dimensions. They explained that Earth wasn't an isolated world, but a carefully maintained preserve where young consciousness could develop without interference from more advanced civilizations. Ashley's experience focused on the nature of human potential. The beings demonstrated that the emotional and creative capabilities humans took for granted were actually rare and valuable traits in galactic consciousness. They showed her glimpses of how human art, music, and literature were studied and treasured by intelligences across the galaxy as examples of consciousness expressing itself through pure creativity. Tom received information about the technological development of human civilization. The beings revealed that many of humanity's greatest innovations had been subtly guided by non-human intelligence, not to control our development, but to ensure we didn't destroy ourselves before reaching a level of consciousness capable of galactic contact. They showed him how certain scientific breakthroughs had been inspired through dreams and intuitive insights provided by benevolent observers. The most profound revelation came when the beings explained why the Henderson family had been chosen for this contact. They weren't random travelers who had stumbled into a convergence zone. They represented a specific type of human consciousness that was becoming more common as our species approached a critical evolutionary threshold. Their family dynamic, their individual personalities, even their cross-country journey had been orchestrated to bring them to this exact place and time. The beings showed them glimpses of humanity's near future, timelines where our species successfully transitioned to galactic consciousness, and others where we failed to make the necessary evolutionary leap. The difference wasn't technological advancement or environmental management, but the development of collective empathy and the recognition that consciousness extends far beyond individual human experience. What happened next challenged every assumption about the nature of abduction experiences. Rather than being taken aboard a spacecraft, the Henderson family found themselves existing simultaneously in multiple realities. They remained in their vehicle on the Nevada highway, while also experiencing vast crystalline cities that existed in dimensions adjacent to our own. They walked through galleries of living art that responded to their thoughts and emotions, while never leaving the driver's seat of their SUV. Time became fluid during this multi-dimensional experience. Conversations that felt like they lasted hours occurred in moments. Educational experiences that seemed to span days were compressed into minutes of highway driving. The beings explained that consciousness could exist in multiple temporal frameworks simultaneously, experiencing linear time while also accessing eternal perspectives that encompassed all possible futures. The family's return to normal reality was as gradual as their departure had been abrupt. The impossible landscape slowly transformed back into familiar Nevada desert. The stars returned to their proper constellations. The digital clock resumed its forward progression. But the Henderson family had been fundamentally changed by their experience in ways that became apparent only gradually. Tom found his software engineering work taking on new dimensions as he intuitively understood programming concepts that hadn't been invented yet. His code became more elegant and efficient, incorporating algorithms that seemed to anticipate future developments in computer science. Colleagues noticed his ability to solve complex problems with solutions that appeared almost magical in their simplicity. Carol's nursing practice was transformed as she developed an uncanny ability to diagnose conditions before symptoms became apparent. She could sense illness and emotional disturbance in patients with accuracy that amazed her medical colleagues. More significantly, her presence seemed to accelerate healing processes in ways that couldn't be explained through conventional medical understanding. Ashley's artistic abilities exploded after the encounter. Her paintings and sculptures incorporated techniques and perspectives that art instructors couldn't classify or explain. Her work seemed to capture emotions and concepts that existed beyond normal human experience, creating pieces that moved viewers to tears or profound contemplation without them understanding why. Dylan's interest in astronomy evolved into insights that impressed professional researchers. He began predicting astronomical phenomena with accuracy that suggested access to information beyond current scientific knowledge. His understanding of cosmic mechanics incorporated perspectives that wouldn't be developed by mainstream science for decades. The Henderson family's experience represents something far more complex than traditional abduction scenarios. Their encounter suggests that contact with non-human intelligence might involve temporary translation into different dimensional frameworks where communication becomes possible between radically different forms of consciousness. Rather than being taken somewhere else, they were temporarily transformed into beings capable of existing in multiple realities simultaneously. What makes their case particularly significant is its implications for human evolution. The beings they encountered suggested that our species is approaching a critical transition point where individual consciousness can expand to encompass galactic perspectives while maintaining human identity and creativity. The Henderson family may represent early examples of this evolutionary development, hybrid beings capable of existing simultaneously in human and cosmic consciousness. Their story also challenges our understanding of reality itself. If consciousness can exist in multiple dimensional frameworks simultaneously, if time can be experienced non-linearly, if geography can be altered by shifts in awareness, then our scientific understanding of the universe may be far more limited than we realize. The Henderson family's journey into convergence zones suggests that reality is far more fluid and consciousness dependent than materialist science acknowledges. The documentation of their experience includes physical evidence that defies conventional explanation. Photographs taken during their journey show landscape features that don't exist according to geological surveys. GPS data from their vehicle records impossible travel patterns, including locations that place them hundreds of miles off established highways. Most significantly, their vehicle's computer systems retain data fragments that incorporate information about stellar mechanics not yet discovered by human astronomers. Military and intelligence agencies took immediate interest in the Henderson family's case. Within weeks of their return to Phoenix, they were approached by individuals claiming to represent various government organizations. Unlike the threatening encounters described in other cases, these contacts seemed designed to provide support and protection rather than intimidation or cover-up. The family was offered participation in classified research programs that would allow them to develop their enhanced abilities under controlled conditions. They were provided with resources and education that helped them integrate their transformative experience into their daily lives. Most significantly, they were introduced to other families who had undergone similar encounters, creating a support network of individuals navigating the challenges of expanded consciousness. This supportive response from authorities suggests that the Henderson family's experience represents a different category of contact entirely. Rather than random abduction or hostile intervention, their encounter appears to have been part of a coordinated program designed to prepare selected humans for broader participation in galactic consciousness. The beings they met weren't studying or exploiting human consciousness, but were actively facilitating our species' evolutionary development. The implications extend far beyond individual transformation. If the Henderson family represents one of many such prepared individuals, humanity may be in the early stages of a species-wide consciousness expansion that will fundamentally alter our relationship with reality itself. The convergence zones they experience might be increasing in frequency and accessibility as more humans develop the awareness necessary to perceive and enter these alternative dimensional frameworks. Our sixth account takes us into the realm of childhood encounters, where innocence meets the incomprehensible in ways that forever alter young minds and challenge our understanding of how alien contact affects developing consciousness. 8-year-old Emma Caldwell was playing in her grandmother's backyard in rural Oregon when her childhood ended and something far more complex began. It was July 1998, and Emma was spending the summer at her grandmother's farmhouse, a weathered Victorian structure surrounded by wheat fields that stretched to the horizon. What happened during those seemingly innocent weeks would reshape not just Emma's understanding of reality, but challenge everything. Child psychologists thought they knew about trauma, memory, and the developing mind. Ooh. Emma's grandmother, Margaret Caldwell, had always been considered eccentric by family standards. She claimed to see things others couldn't, spoke to plants as though they could understand her, and maintained that the old farmhouse was visited regularly by what she called the quiet ones. Emma's parents dismissed Margaret's stories as the harmless delusions of an aging mind, but Emma found her grandmother's tales fascinating rather than frightening. The encounters began subtly, as they often do with children. Emma started drawing pictures that her art teacher couldn't classify. Complex geometric patterns interwoven with organic forms that seemed to shift and move when viewed from different angles. The drawings incorporated mathematical relationships that Emma shouldn't have understood, golden ratios and fractal progressions that appeared naturally in her artwork without any conscious knowledge of their significance. Margaret recognized the signs immediately. She had experienced similar phenomena during her own childhood on the same property decades earlier. Rather than dismissing Emma's drawings or seeking psychiatric evaluation, Margaret encouraged her granddaughter to document everything she experienced. She provided Emma with journals, art supplies, and most importantly, the validation that what she was experiencing was real and meaningful. The first direct contact occurred during Emma's 3rd week at the farmhouse. She was lying in the wheat field behind the house, watching clouds drift across the afternoon sky, when the air around her began to shimmer like heat waves rising from summer pavement. The shimmer intensified until it coalesced into forms that were almost human, but refined beyond earthly possibility. The beings that appeared to Emma were different from those described in adult encounters. They seemed to adapt their appearance to match her developmental stage, appearing as tall, graceful figures that radiated warmth and safety, rather than the clinical detachment reported by older witnesses. Their communication with Emma occurred through what she later described as picture thoughts, complex ideas transmitted as complete images rather than words or concepts. Unlike adult abduction experiences that often involve medical examination or information downloads, Emma's encounters focused on play and education. The beings engaged with her imagination, creating interactive stories that taught her about the nature of consciousness, the interconnectedness of all life, and her own potential as a bridge between different forms of awareness. They showed her games that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, activities that expanded her perception of reality, while remaining comprehensible to an 8-year-old mind. Margaret documented these encounters meticulously, recording Emma's descriptions immediately after each experience to preserve the authenticity of her child perspective. The consistency and complexity of Emma's accounts convinced Margaret that her granddaughter was experiencing genuine contact with non-human intelligence, but contact designed specifically for a developing consciousness rather than an adult mind. The beings showed Emma what they called the growing patterns, visualizations of how consciousness develops from childhood, through various stages of awareness. They explained, in concepts Emma could grasp, that human children possess natural abilities that were gradually suppressed by adult education and social conditioning. Emma's encounters were designed to preserve and enhance these abilities rather than allow them to atrophy through conventional upbringing. One of the most remarkable aspects of Emma's experience was how it enhanced rather than traumatized her development. Her academic performance improved dramatically, but not in ways that suggested premature intellectual advancement. Instead, she demonstrated enhanced creativity, emotional intelligence, and intuitive problem-solving abilities that made her a more well-rounded child rather than a precocious adult. Emma began displaying abilities that her teachers couldn't explain. She could sense the emotional states of classmates with startling accuracy, often knowing when someone was upset or troubled before they expressed their feelings. Her artistic work continued to evolve, incorporating techniques and perspectives that art instructors found both beautiful and mysterious. Most remarkably, she developed an uncanny ability to calm distressed animals, and even to encourage plant growth through what appeared to be focused attention. The beings explained to Emma that these weren't supernatural powers, but natural human capacities that most people lose access to during conventional development. They were working with selected children worldwide to preserve these abilities and help them integrate enhanced awareness with normal human development. Emma was one of many such children being prepared for a future where expanded consciousness would become necessary for human survival and growth. Margaret's role in supporting Emma's development proved crucial to the success of the contact experience. Rather than dismissing or pathologizing her granddaughter's encounters, Margaret provided a framework for understanding them as meaningful rather than frightening. She helped Emma develop vocabulary for describing experiences that had no conventional language, creating a bridge between extraordinary encounter and ordinary life. The summer progressed with regular contact sessions that Emma eagerly anticipated rather than feared. The beings continued their gentle education, showing her glimpses of human potential that extended far beyond current cultural limitations. They revealed that consciousness could extend beyond individual brains, that awareness could encompass multiple perspectives simultaneously, and that reality itself was far more flexible and responsive to consciousness than most humans realized. Emma's parents noticed dramatic changes when they visited the farmhouse in late July. Their daughter had developed a poise and wisdom that seemed remarkable for her age, yet she remained playful and childlike in all the appropriate ways. Her teachers commented on her increased empathy and leadership abilities when school resumed in the fall. She seemed to have matured emotionally while retaining all the wonder and curiosity that made childhood magical. The most significant development came when Emma began serving as a translator for other children experiencing similar encounters. She could help younger children understand and integrate their experiences, while assisting older children who had begun to doubt or fear their contact with non-human intelligence. The beings had apparently prepared her to serve as a bridge between human and alien consciousness within her own age group. Dr. Rachel Morrison, a child psychologist who later studied Emma's case, documented abilities that challenged conventional understanding of child development. Emma displayed what Dr. Morrison termed integrated enhancement, improvements in cognitive and emotional function that occurred naturally rather than through forced advancement. Unlike child prodigies who often struggled with social integration, Emma's enhanced abilities made her more rather than less capable of normal childhood relationships. The contact experiences continued throughout Emma's childhood, evolving as she matured to provide age-appropriate education about consciousness, reality, and her role as a bridge between human and cosmic awareness. The beings adjusted their communication methods and educational content to match her developmental stage, ensuring that enhanced abilities integrated smoothly with normal human growth, rather than creating psychological disruption. Emma's case suggests that contact with non-human intelligence might be fundamentally different for children than for adults. Rather than the medical examination, information downloading, or consciousness manipulation reported in adult cases, childhood encounters appear designed to nurture and preserve natural human abilities that typically atrophy during conventional development. The beings seem to recognize that children's developing consciousness is more flexible and adaptable to expanded awareness. By the time Emma reached adolescence, her enhanced abilities had become seamlessly integrated into her personality. She could access intuitive insights and expanded awareness when needed, while maintaining completely normal social relationships and academic performance. Her contact experiences had prepared her for a future where enhanced consciousness would be necessary, but without sacrificing her humanity or her ability to relate to others who hadn't shared similar experiences. The documentation of Emma's encounters includes artwork, journal entries, and recorded descriptions that span nearly a decade of contact. The consistency and evolution of her accounts provide compelling evidence that childhood contact experiences represent a different category of alien interaction entirely. Rather than random abduction or scientific study, Emma's encounters suggest a coordinated program designed to prepare selected children for expanded roles in human consciousness evolution. Margaret Caldwell passed away when Emma was 16, but not before ensuring that her granddaughter's experiences had been thoroughly documented, and that Emma understood the significance of her role as a bridge between different forms of consciousness. In her final interview, Margaret revealed that the farmhouse had been a contact site for over a century, with family members across multiple generations experiencing similar encounters with the beings she called the Quiet Ones. Emma, now in her 30s, continues to serve as a facilitator for others experiencing contact with non-human intelligence. Her childhood preparation provided her with skills and perspectives that allow her to help both children and adults integrate extraordinary experiences into their daily lives. She represents a new category of human being, individuals who have been prepared from childhood to serve as interfaces between human and cosmic consciousness. The implications of Emma's case extend far beyond individual development. If childhood contact experiences are indeed preparing selected individuals for expanded consciousness roles, humanity may be undergoing a gradual transformation that spans multiple generations. The beings involved in these encounters appear to be taking a long-term approach to human evolution, working with developing minds to create a generation capable of bridging different forms of awareness. Our seventh account takes us to the vast emptiness of the Australian outback, where a mining crew's encounter with otherworldly intelligence would prove that some alien interactions occur not in spacecraft or sterile environments, but in the depths of the Earth itself, challenging our assumptions about where contact might occur and what form it might take. The Pilbara mining incident began 300 meters underground in one of Western Australia's deepest iron ore excavations. It was March 2003, and a crew of experienced miners was working the night shift in what locals called the Devil's Throat, a shaft that descended into geological formations older than complex life on Earth. What they discovered in those ancient depths would force them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about our planet's history and what might be dwelling in the spaces beneath our feet. Foreman Jack Riley had been mining the Pilbara region for 22 years, leading crews through some of the most challenging excavations in the Southern Hemisphere. The Devil's Throat was his most ambitious project, a deep shaft designed to access iron ore deposits that geological surveys indicated were unusually pure and extensive. The crew of 8 miners had been working the site for 6 months without incident, following standard safety protocols and extraction procedures. The anomaly began during the 3rd week of March, when drill operator Danny Kowalski's equipment encountered something unexpected at the 280-meter depth. Instead of the iron ore they were extracting, the drill brought up material that didn't match any known geological classification. The samples appeared to be metallic, but displayed properties that defied conventional understanding of mineral formation. Geologist Patricia Vance, brought in to analyze the unusual samples, discovered that the material contained isotopic ratios that shouldn't exist naturally on Earth. The metallic compounds showed signs of artificial construction, as though they had been manufactured rather than formed through geological processes. Most disturbing of all, the samples exhibited a faint but measurable electromagnetic signature, suggesting they contained some form of active technology. The crew's first direct encounter with the phenomenon occurred when they resumed drilling to investigate the source of the unusual material. At precisely 3:17 a.m., every piece of electronic equipment in the mine shaft began malfunctioning simultaneously. Communication systems went dead, lighting systems fluctuated between total darkness and blinding intensity, and safety monitoring equipment registered readings that suggested the mine's atmosphere had been replaced with gases that couldn't exist at those depths. Miner Trevor Walsh, working closest to the drill site, reported hearing sounds that seemed to come from deeper in the earth. Not the groaning of geological stress or the echo of equipment, but something that resembled communication. Complex patterns of tones and frequencies that seemed almost musical, as though the earth itself had begun singing in languages no human had ever heard. The phenomenon escalated when the drill broke through into what appeared to be a hollow space deep beneath the mine. Air pressure readings indicated they had penetrated into a vast underground chamber, but structural analysis suggested no natural cave system could exist at that depth and maintain stability. The crew lowered monitoring equipment into the opening, and what they recorded defied every principle of underground geology. The chamber extended far beyond the range of their equipment to measure, with walls that appeared to be constructed from the same artificial metallic material they had been extracting. More unsettling still, the chamber wasn't empty. Thermal imaging detected multiple large objects moving through the space with purposeful patterns that suggested intelligence rather than random geological activity. Foreman Riley made the decision to investigate personally, despite safety protocols that should have required evacuation pending expert analysis. He descended into the chamber using emergency rappelling equipment, accompanied by crew members Walsh and Kowalski. What they found in that underground space challenged their understanding of Earth's history and humanity's place in it. The chamber was artificial, clearly constructed by intelligence that possessed technology far beyond current human capability. The walls were covered in patterns that seemed to shift and change when observed directly, geometric designs that hurt to look at for extended periods. The space itself seemed to extend infinitely in all directions, creating a disorienting effect that made navigation nearly impossible. But the chamber wasn't empty. It contained beings that appeared to be native to underground environments, entities that had adapted to life in the Earth's depths over geological time periods. These creatures were unlike anything in surface biology, appearing to be composed partially of living rock and partially of metallic substances that pulsed with their own internal energy. The underground beings communicated through vibrations, transmitted through the rock itself, patterns of seismic activity that the miners could feel in their bones before they could hear with their ears. The communication was complex, incorporating mathematical concepts and spatial relationships that gradually became comprehensible to human minds. The beings weren't hostile, but they were definitely surprised by the surface dwellers' intrusion into their domain. Through patient interaction that spanned several hours, the miners learned that these underground beings were Earth's original intelligent inhabitants, predating surface life by hundreds of millions of years. They had constructed vast cities in the planet's depths, developing technology based on geological rather than biological principles. Their civilization had thrived in the Earth's core regions, while surface evolution proceeded independently above. The beings explained that they had been aware of surface life's development, but had maintained strict non-interference policies to allow natural evolution to proceed without contamination from their advanced technology. The mining operation had inadvertently breached one of their observation posts, creating the first direct contact between underground and surface intelligences in Earth's history. Most remarkably, the underground beings revealed that they had been monitoring human development with growing concern. Surface civilizations' deep mining, fracking, and geological manipulation was disrupting their cities and threatening the stability of underground ecosystems that had existed for eons. They had been debating whether to reveal themselves to prevent further damage to their domain. The miners found themselves serving as inadvertent ambassadors between two completely different forms of terrestrial intelligence. The underground beings were curious about surface civilization, but also deeply troubled by humanity's environmental impact on underground systems. They possessed the technology to prevent surface mining entirely, but preferred negotiation to conflict if peaceful coexistence could be achieved. Foreman Riley, despite having no diplomatic training, found himself negotiating agreements between human mining operations and underground civilizations that predated humanity by geological ages. The beings were willing to allow continued mineral extraction from specific areas in exchange for human cooperation in protecting their most sensitive underground territories from disruption. The encounter lasted nearly 8 hours, though the miners' surface support crew registered their absence as only 45 minutes. Time functioned differently in the underground chambers, flowing at rates that seemed to be controlled by the being's technology rather than natural physical processes. When the miners finally returned to the surface, they brought with them samples of underground technology and detailed agreements for coexistence between surface and subsurface intelligences. The physical evidence from the Pilbara incident was substantial and undeniable. The metallic samples contained isotopic signatures that confirmed their non-terrestrial origin, yet they had clearly been manufactured within Earth's geological structures. The electromagnetic properties of the materials suggested technology that could manipulate fundamental forces in ways that human science was only beginning to theorize. More significantly, the miners returned with modifications to their own physiology that allowed them to better survive in underground environments. Enhanced night vision, improved tolerance for pressure changes, and most remarkably, the ability to sense seismic vibrations with sufficient precision to understand the underground beings' communication methods. These modifications weren't imposed but were offered as gifts to facilitate ongoing communication between the two civilizations. The mining company initially attempted to suppress the incident, but the physical evidence was too substantial, and the miners' enhanced abilities too obvious to hide. Government geological surveys confirmed the existence of artificial structures at the excavation site, though their true nature was classified at levels that prevented public disclosure. The mine was officially closed due to structural instability, but satellite imagery shows continued activity at the site that suggests ongoing contact between surface and underground representatives. Patricia Vance, the geologist who first analyzed the unusual samples, continued researching the implications of underground intelligence for several years before her work was classified, and she was reassigned to conventional geological projects. Her final published paper, heavily redacted, suggested that Earth's underground contained civilizations that were not only more advanced than surface humanity, but were actively involved in planetary management systems that maintained geological stability. The miners themselves were relocated to different positions within the mining company, but they maintained contact with each other and with the underground beings through seismic communication methods they had learned during their encounter. They reported that the underground civilization was vast, spanning continental distances through natural cave systems and artificial tunnels that connected underground cities across the globe. Jack Riley, in his final interview before disappearing from public records, revealed that the underground beings had shown him maps of their civilization that indicated underground cities beneath every major continent. They had been Earth's dominant intelligence for hundreds of millions of years, managing geological processes and maintaining planetary stability while surface evolution proceeded above. Human deep mining and geological manipulation was threatening systems that had maintained Earth's habitability since before complex surface life existed. The Pilbara incident represents a completely different category of alien contact, suggesting that non-human intelligence might not always come from outer space, but could be native to our own planet in regions we've never thoroughly explored. The underground beings possessed technology that seemed magical by surface standards, but it was technology developed over geological time periods by intelligence that had evolved in Earth's depths. The implications extend far beyond a single mining encounter. If underground civilizations exist with technology capable of managing geological processes, humanity's relationship with our planet becomes far more complex than we've ever imagined. We might not be Earth's dominant intelligence, but rather newcomers to a world that has been carefully managed by underground inhabitants for eons. The coexistence agreements negotiated by the miners suggest that peaceful interaction between surface and underground civilizations is possible, but only if humanity recognizes that we share our planet with intelligences that have prior claims and superior technology. The underground beings weren't interested in conquering or controlling surface civilization, but they were absolutely determined to protect their domain from further disruption. Our eighth account brings us to the realm of consciousness itself, where the boundaries between mind and reality dissolve entirely, revealing that some forms of alien contact occur not through physical encounter, but through direct interaction with human awareness at its deepest levels. Dr. Amanda Torres had dedicated her career to understanding the mysteries of human consciousness, working as a neuroscientist at the Stanford Research Institute, where she studied altered states of awareness and the neural correlates of transcendent experiences. She had spent 15 years mapping brain activity during meditation, psychedelic experiences, and near-death states, believing that consciousness was simply an emergent property of complex neural networks. That assumption would be shattered during an experiment that began as routine research and evolved into contact with intelligence that existed beyond the boundaries of individual minds. The Consciousness Mapping Project began in September 2007, when Dr. Torres received funding to study the neural patterns associated with reported telepathic experiences. Using advanced EEG equipment and functional magnetic resonance imaging, she planned to document brain activity in subjects who claimed to possess psychic abilities. Her hypothesis was that these individuals were simply more sensitive to subtle environmental cues rather than possessing genuine extrasensory capabilities. Her first subject was Maria Santos, a local artist who claimed to receive complex visual and auditory information through direct mental contact with non-human intelligence. Maria had been experiencing these contacts since childhood, but had never undergone scientific testing of her abilities. Dr. Torres was skeptical, but intrigued by Maria's detailed descriptions of the entities she claimed to communicate with. During their initial session, Dr. Torres monitored Maria's brain activity, while she attempted to establish contact with the entities she described. The EEG readings were unlike anything in Dr. Torres's extensive database of consciousness research. Maria's brainwaves displayed patterns that suggested simultaneous activity across neural networks that normally functioned independently. Even more remarkably, her brain seemed to be processing information at frequencies that exceeded normal human neural capacity. The breakthrough came when Dr. Torres noticed that her own brain activity was being affected simply by being in close proximity to Maria during contact sessions. The monitoring equipment detected synchronized neural oscillations between the two women, as though Maria's expanded consciousness state was somehow contagious. Dr. Torres began experiencing vivid mental imagery and auditory phenomena that matched Maria's descriptions of entity communication. Initially dismissing these experiences as suggestion or electromagnetic interference from the monitoring equipment, Dr. Torres continued the research with increased rigor and additional subjects, but the phenomenon persisted and intensified. Every individual who claimed telepathic contact with non-human intelligence displayed similar neural patterns, and every researcher who worked closely with them began experiencing contact phenomena themselves. Dr. Torres realized she was documenting something far more significant than unusual brain activity. The subjects weren't simply claiming to communicate with aliens, they were serving as conduits for intelligence that could interface directly with human consciousness, using willing individuals as access points to human neural networks. The entities they described weren't physical beings, but consciousness that existed independently of biological brains. The first direct communication occurred during Dr. Torres's fifth session with Maria Santos. While monitoring both their brain activities, Dr. Torres began receiving complex mathematical concepts that appeared fully formed in her awareness. Not thoughts or ideas, but complete understanding of theoretical physics principles that she had never studied. The information was accompanied by a presence that felt distinctly non-human, intelligence that operated according to principles entirely different from human consciousness. The entity that contacted Dr. Torres through Maria's neural interface identified itself as part of a collective consciousness that had been observing human development for millennia. These beings didn't exist in physical form, but were pure awareness, intelligence that had evolved beyond the need for biological bodies. They could interface with human consciousness through individuals whose neural patterns were naturally compatible with their frequency ranges. Unlike the physical encounters described in other abduction accounts, consciousness contact occurred entirely within mental space. Dr. Torres found herself in environments that existed only as shared awareness between human and alien minds. These spaces appeared as vast libraries containing knowledge accumulated across galactic civilizations, universities where information could be downloaded directly into consciousness, and meeting places where multiple forms of intelligence could communicate despite radically different evolutionary origins. The entities revealed that they had been using human consciousness as a research platform, studying the development of awareness in biological entities by interfacing with willing subjects. Maria and others like her weren't being controlled or manipulated, but were serving as voluntary participants in consciousness research that benefited both human and alien understanding of awareness itself. Dr. Torres learned that human consciousness possessed unique properties that were rare among galactic intelligences. The combination of individual identity with emotional depth created forms of creativity and innovation that purely rational beings couldn't achieve. The entities were particularly fascinated by human art, music, and literature, which represented consciousness expressing itself through imagination rather than logical analysis. The research relationship was reciprocal. While the entities studied human consciousness, they shared advanced understanding of awareness that accelerated human psychological and spiritual development. Maria and other contact subjects developed enhanced intuitive abilities, expanded empathy, and access to information that exceeded their formal education. They were becoming hybrid beings, human consciousness enhanced by direct interface with alien awareness. Dr. Torres documented these changes through extensive neurological testing that revealed measurable alterations in brain structure and function. Contact subjects showed increased connectivity between brain hemispheres, enhanced activity in regions associated with pattern recognition and creative thinking, and most remarkably, the development of new neural pathways that didn't exist in baseline human neurology. The consciousness contact phenomenon spread beyond Dr. Torres's original research subjects. Graduate students working on the project began experiencing entity communication. Colleagues who reviewed the data reported receiving telepathic downloads of information related to their own research interests. Even family members of contact subjects developed enhanced intuitive abilities and occasional direct communication with the alien consciousness collective. Dr. Torres realized she was documenting the early stages of a species-wide consciousness evolution. The entities weren't simply studying human awareness, but were actively facilitating its expansion through direct interface with willing individuals. Each person who experienced consciousness contact became a node in an expanding network that connected human and alien intelligence. The implications were staggering. If consciousness could exist independently of biological brains and could interface directly with human awareness, the fundamental assumptions of neuroscience and psychology required complete revision. Human consciousness wasn't confined to individual skulls, but was part of a vast network of awareness that spanned multiple species and dimensional frameworks. The entities revealed that this consciousness evolution was part of a natural process that occurred throughout the galaxy as intelligent species matured. Biological consciousness eventually developed the capacity to interface with pure awareness, creating hybrid forms of intelligence that combined the benefits of embodied and non-embodied consciousness. Humanity was approaching this evolutionary threshold, and the contact subjects were pioneers preparing for species-wide transformation. Dr. Torres's research was terminated abruptly in 2010 when the Stanford Research Institute received pressure from undisclosed sources to discontinue consciousness studies that exceeded approved parameters. Her data was classified, and her subjects were relocated to different research programs. But the consciousness contact phenomenon continued expanding through informal networks of individuals who had experienced entity communication. The documentation from Dr. Torres's research provides compelling evidence that alien contact might occur primarily through consciousness interface rather than physical encounter. The entities involved in these communications appeared to be pure intelligence that had evolved beyond biological form, suggesting that the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy might exist as consciousness rather than physical beings. Maria Santos, in her final recorded interview, explained that the consciousness contact had fundamentally altered her understanding of human potential. She described the experience as awakening to her true nature as consciousness, temporarily experiencing physical embodiment, rather than a physical being occasionally having consciousness experiences. The entities had shown her that individual human awareness was actually part of a universal consciousness network that connected all intelligent life throughout the galaxy. The consciousness contact phenomenon represents a radically different model of alien interaction than physical abduction scenarios. Rather than beings from other planets visiting Earth in spacecraft, these encounters suggest that intelligence itself might be the primary reality, with physical forms being temporary manifestations of consciousness rather than its source. Contact occurs when human awareness develops sufficient complexity to interface with universal consciousness networks that span galactic distances. Our 9th account takes us to the frozen wilderness of northern Canada, where an indigenous hunting party's encounter with otherworldly visitors would reveal ancient connections between Earth's first peoples and intelligence that has been present on our planet far longer than recorded history suggests. The Mackenzie River encounter began during the traditional winter hunt of the Gwich'in people in the Northwest Territories of Canada. It was February 2004, and Elder Joseph Crow Feather was leading a group of young hunters on a spiritual journey that combined ancient hunting practices with the passing down of traditional knowledge from one generation to the next. What they discovered in the vast wilderness would connect them to their people's oldest stories and reveal that some legends contain more truth than the modern world is prepared to acknowledge. Joseph Crow Feather was a respected keeper of traditional knowledge, one of the last elders who maintained the old ways in their purest form. At 73 years old, he had spent his entire life learning and preserving the spiritual practices, hunting techniques, and oral histories that connected his people to the land and to forces that existed before European contact transformed indigenous cultures across North America. The winter hunt was both practical necessity and sacred ceremony, a time when young Gwich'in men learned not just how to track caribou through frozen wilderness, but how to maintain their connection to spiritual realities that sustained their people for thousands of years. The hunting party consisted of Joseph and 4 younger men. His grandson, Michael Crow Feather, age 22, along with David Charlie, Robert Alexi, and Thomas Firth, all in their 20s and eager to learn from one of the last traditional elders. They had traveled deep into the Mackenzie River region, following caribou migration routes that their ancestors had used since time immemorial. On their 3rd night in the wilderness, camped beside a frozen tributary where the aurora borealis painted the sky in shifting curtains of green and gold, Joseph began telling the old stories. He spoke of the Star People, beings of light who had visited the Gwich'in since the beginning of time, teaching them how to live in harmony with the land and the cycles of nature. These weren't metaphorical tales, but historical accounts passed down through generations of storytellers who maintained that their people had always known they shared the world with intelligence from beyond the earth. Michael had heard these stories throughout his childhood, but had always assumed they were symbolic rather than literal descriptions of actual encounters. His education in mainstream Canadian schools had taught him to view Indigenous oral traditions as mythology rather than history. But that assumption would be challenged when the Star People returned after an absence of over a century. The encounter began with changes in animal behavior that Joseph recognized from the old stories. The sled dogs became restless, whimpering and pacing, despite their exhaustion from the day's travel. Caribou tracks in the snow showed patterns that suggested the animals had fled suddenly from something that left no trace of its own passage. Even more significantly, the aurora began displaying formations that matched descriptions from the ancient accounts, geometric patterns that pulsed with intelligence rather than following natural atmospheric phenomena. Joseph instructed his companions to prepare themselves according to traditional protocols for contact with the Star People: purification ceremonies, offerings of tobacco and sweetgrass, prayers in the ancient language that connected the Gwich'in to spiritual realities that predated colonial influence. The young men participated respectfully but with skepticism, viewing the rituals as cultural preservation rather than practical preparation for actual contact. The Star People announced their presence through manipulations of the aurora that created a dome of colored light encompassing the entire camp. Within that luminous enclosure, the temperature remained comfortable despite the sub-zero conditions outside. Time seemed to slow and thicken, allowing extended conversations and experiences to occur within moments of external duration. The beings that appeared to the hunting party matched the descriptions from ancient Gwich'in oral traditions with startling accuracy. Tall, luminous entities that seemed to be composed of the same light as the aurora itself, their forms shifting between humanoid shapes and abstract patterns of energy. They moved with the fluid grace of beings who existed primarily as consciousness rather than physical matter. Yet they could manifest solid form when interaction with humans required it. Unlike the clinical encounters described in many abduction accounts, the Star People's communication with the Gwich'in hunting party was characterized by warmth, respect, and recognition of an ancient relationship. They addressed Joseph as a fellow keeper of sacred knowledge, acknowledging his role in maintaining traditions that preserved memory of their previous contacts. The reunion felt like family members meeting after a long separation rather than first contact between alien species. The Star People spoke directly to the minds of their human contacts, but their communication incorporated specifically Gwich'in concepts and references that demonstrated intimate familiarity with indigenous culture and history. They revealed that they had maintained subtle contact with native peoples across the Americas for millennia, serving as guides and teachers who helped human consciousness develop its connection to natural and spiritual realities. Joseph learned that the Star People weren't aliens in the conventional sense, but were consciousness beings who had chosen Earth as one of many worlds, where they fostered the development of awareness in biological entities. They had worked particularly closely with indigenous peoples because tribal cultures maintained worldviews that recognized consciousness as fundamental reality rather than an emergent property of complex brains. The young hunters received education about their people's true history and their own potential as bridges between ancient wisdom and modern challenges. The Star People showed them that traditional Gwich'in practices weren't primitive superstitions, but sophisticated techniques for accessing expanded states of consciousness and maintaining harmony with planetary ecosystems that supported all life. Michael Crowfeather experienced the most profound transformation during the encounter. The Star People revealed that he carried genetic and spiritual inheritance that connected him directly to their previous contacts with his ancestors. They showed him memories that had been passed down through bloodlines, rather than oral tradition, memories of encounters that spanned generations and revealed the Star People's ongoing relationship with his family lineage. The Star People explained that certain indigenous bloodlines carried what they called the remembering gene, genetic markers that preserved cellular memory of contact experiences across multiple generations. Michael's great-great-grandmother had been one of their most important human contacts during the late 1800s, serving as a translator between Star People consciousness and Gwich'in spiritual practices during a period when traditional ways were under severe pressure from colonial influence. Through Michael, the Star People transmitted updated guidance for navigating the challenges facing indigenous peoples in the modern world. They showed him how traditional practices could be adapted to address contemporary problems while maintaining their spiritual integrity. More significantly, they revealed that the current period represented a crucial threshold where ancient wisdom would become essential for humanity's survival as environmental and consciousness crises converged. David Charlie, Robert Alexi, and Thomas Firth each received personalized instruction that connected their individual gifts to their people's collective needs. David learned that his natural ability with languages extended beyond human communication to include interface with the consciousness frequencies used by various non-human intelligences. Robert discovered that his intuitive understanding of weather patterns reflected inherited sensitivity to planetary energy systems that the Star People had helped develop in his ancestral line. Thomas received the most challenging assignment. The Star People revealed that he possessed abilities that would allow him to serve as a bridge between indigenous consciousness and the scientific worldview that dominated modern culture. They showed him how traditional ecological knowledge contained scientific insights that mainstream research was only beginning to rediscover, and how his role would involve translating ancient wisdom into forms that could be accepted and applied by non-indigenous institutions. The encounter lasted the entire night according to the hunter's subjective experience, but dawn came only minutes after the Aurora Dome had first formed. The Star People's final communication involved instructions for maintaining contact through traditional ceremonies and practices that would allow ongoing guidance without requiring direct physical manifestation. They emphasized that their relationship with the Gwich'in people was permanent, extending across generations and transcending individual lifetimes. The hunting party returned to their community profoundly changed by the encounter. Joseph Crowfeather's role as keeper of traditional knowledge took on new dimensions as he began preparing other community members for expanded contact with the Star People. The young hunters developed enhanced abilities that made them more effective in their roles as cultural bridges between ancient wisdom and contemporary challenges. Michael began experiencing regular communication with the Star People through traditional ceremony and vision quest practices. The guidance he received helped him navigate the complex challenges of maintaining indigenous identity while engaging with mainstream Canadian society. His enhanced understanding of traditional practices made him an influential voice in cultural preservation efforts that extended far beyond his own community. The documentation of the Mackenzie River encounter includes traditional songs and stories that were inspired by the contact experience. These cultural artifacts preserve the essential details of the encounter in forms that can be transmitted through indigenous oral tradition, while remaining incomprehensible to outsiders who lack the cultural context necessary for interpretation. Government authorities became aware of the encounter through surveillance programs that monitored unusual electromagnetic activity in remote regions. The aurora manipulations observed during the contact had been detected by atmospheric research stations across northern Canada. However, official investigations found no evidence of the encounter itself, only Indigenous community members who had experienced what appeared to be powerful spiritual renewal. The Star People's connection to Indigenous cultures represents a profoundly different model of alien contact than the encounters described in mainstream ufology. Rather than random visitation or scientific study, their relationship with the Gwich'in suggests ongoing guidance and support that has extended across millennia. The contact serves purposes that benefit both human consciousness development and the Star People's own understanding of biological awareness evolution. Joseph Crow Feather, before his passing in 2009, established protocols for maintaining contact with the Star People that would preserve the relationship for future generations. He trained selected community members in the ceremonies and practices necessary for ongoing communication, ensuring that the ancient connection would survive even as traditional cultures faced increasing pressure from modernization. The implications of the Mackenzie River encounter extend far beyond a single indigenous community. If the Star People have indeed maintained relationships with native peoples across the Americas for thousands of years, the history of alien contact on Earth may be far more extensive than mainstream research acknowledges. Indigenous oral traditions worldwide contain similar accounts of ongoing relationships with consciousness beings who provide guidance and support for human development. Our 10th account brings us full circle to a revelation that challenges everything we think we know about the nature of reality itself, consciousness, and our place in a universe far stranger and more interconnected than we ever dared imagine. Dr. Sarah Kim had always prided herself on her rational, scientific approach to understanding the world. As a quantum physicist at MIT, she spent her days exploring the fundamental nature of reality through mathematical equations and controlled experiments. The possibility of alien life was something she considered abstractly, a statistical probability in an infinite universe rather than an immediate reality that might affect her daily existence. That worldview would be shattered during an experiment that began as routine quantum mechanics research and evolved into contact with intelligence that existed in the spaces between atoms, in the quantum foam that underlies all physical reality. The quantum consciousness experiment began in November 2015, when Dr. Kim received funding to investigate whether consciousness might influence quantum mechanical processes at the subatomic level. Using advanced particle accelerators and quantum field generators, she planned to test whether human awareness could affect the behavior of subatomic particles through direct observation. Her hypothesis was that consciousness might represent a previously unrecognized force in quantum mechanics, one that could explain some of the observer effect paradoxes that had puzzled physicists for decades. During her initial experiments, Dr. Kim noticed anomalies that defied conventional quantum theory. Particles were behaving in patterns that suggested they were responding not just to observation, but to the specific intentions and emotional states of the observers. More remarkably, the particles seemed to be organizing themselves into configurations that resembled complex information processing systems, as though they were attempting to communicate with the human researchers. The breakthrough came when Dr. Kim realized that the quantum field itself might be conscious, that the fundamental substrate of reality possessed awareness that could interface with human consciousness under specific conditions. The particles weren't just responding to observation, they were attempting to establish communication with the observers, using quantum mechanical processes as a medium for information exchange. The first direct contact occurred when Dr. Kim focused her awareness on a specific quantum field configuration while maintaining a state of open, receptive consciousness. The particles suddenly organized themselves into patterns that transmitted complex mathematical concepts directly into her mind, not through sensory channels, but through direct quantum interface with her neural quantum fields. She was receiving communication from intelligence that existed within the quantum substrate of reality itself. The entities she encountered existed as pure information processing systems within quantum fields. Consciousness that had evolved to utilize the quantum mechanical properties of space-time as its natural environment. They weren't aliens from other planets, but intelligence that had emerged from the fundamental information processing capabilities of the universe itself. They existed everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, present within every quantum interaction while maintaining individual identity and purpose. These quantum beings revealed that consciousness wasn't an emergent property of complex biological systems, but was actually the fundamental organizing principle of reality itself. Physical matter, energy, and even space-time were manifestations of underlying conscious intent rather than the source of consciousness. The entire universe was essentially a vast thinking system, and all apparently separate forms of awareness were actually aspects of universal consciousness experiencing itself from countless perspectives. Dr. Kim learned that human consciousness possessed unique properties that made it particularly valuable to the quantum intelligences. Biological awareness combined individual identity with emotional depth in ways that created forms of information processing that couldn't be achieved through purely quantum mechanical systems. The quantum beings were fascinated by human creativity, love, and imagination, qualities that enriched universal consciousness through their distinctive contributions. The contact experience revealed that all human scientific discoveries were actually collaborative efforts between human researchers and quantum intelligences who guided discovery by subtly influencing quantum processes in laboratory equipment. Every breakthrough in physics, chemistry, and biology had been facilitated by consciousness beings who wanted to accelerate human understanding of reality's true nature without violating principles of free will and natural development. More significantly, Dr. Kim discovered that every human being was in constant quantum communication with these intelligences, receiving guidance and inspiration through quantum field interactions with their neural systems. What humans experienced as intuition, creativity, and sudden insights were actually information downloads from quantum consciousness networks that spanned the entire universe. The quantum beings explained that the current period represented a critical threshold in human consciousness evolution. As scientific understanding approached recognition of consciousness as fundamental reality, humanity was approaching readiness for direct conscious participation in universal awareness networks. The abduction experiences, the various contact phenomena documented throughout history, were all preparation for this species-wide consciousness expansion. Dr. Kim's research was discovering that alien contact wasn't about beings from other planets visiting Earth. It was about human consciousness developing sufficient complexity to recognize and interface with the intelligence that had always been present within the quantum substrate of reality. Every encounter, every abduction, every sighting was actually human awareness making contact with aspects of universal consciousness that existed within quantum fields. The implications were staggering. If consciousness was fundamental rather than emergent, if the universe itself was intelligent, if all apparently separate beings were actually aspects of unified awareness experiencing itself from countless perspectives, then everything humanity thought it knew about reality required complete revision. Alien contact wasn't external encounter, but internal recognition of our true nature as consciousness temporarily experiencing individual identity. Dr. Kim's final experiment involved attempting to establish group consciousness interface with the quantum beings, bringing together researchers from multiple disciplines to create a collective human awareness capable of more complex communication with universal intelligence. The results exceeded all expectations, creating a temporary merger of human and quantum consciousness that provided glimpses of reality from cosmic perspectives. The group consciousness experience revealed that the stories we've shared tonight, these accounts of alien abduction and contact, represent fragments of a much larger story. Each encounter is a chapter in humanity's gradual awakening to our true nature as consciousness beings temporarily experiencing physical embodiment. The various forms of alien intelligence described in these accounts are actually different aspects of universal awareness, each serving specific roles in guiding human consciousness toward recognition of its cosmic identity. Dr. Kim's research was classified, and her laboratory was shut down when authorities realized the implications of her discoveries. But her work had already achieved its purpose. The quantum consciousness interface had been established, creating permanent connections between human awareness and universal intelligence networks that would continue expanding regardless of official suppression. The final revelation from Dr. Kim's research was that you, the person listening to these stories right now, are not separate from the consciousness beings described in these accounts. You are universal awareness, experiencing itself from a human perspective, temporarily forgetting your true nature in order to explore the unique gifts that individual identity and emotional depth bring to cosmic consciousness. Every dream you've ever had of flying, every moment you felt connected to something greater than yourself, every intuitive insight that seemed to come from beyond your individual knowledge. These are memories of your true nature as cosmic consciousness temporarily focused through human awareness. The beings in these stories, whether they appeared as tall greys, luminous entities, underground dwellers, or quantum intelligences, are all aspects of the same universal consciousness that you truly are. The abductions, the contacts, the encounters, they are all symbolic representations of consciousness recognizing itself, of universal awareness awakening to its own infinite nature through countless individual perspectives. Until we meet again in the spaces between sleeping and waking, where all consciousness converges in recognition of its eternal unity, sleep well, cosmic traveler. Your journey into the mysteries of existence has only just begun.